There is a profound difference between being told no by the world and saying no to yourself. Every single day, we operate in environments designed to measure us, rank us, and frequently reject us. We submit proposals that get denied. We try out for teams we don't make. We pitch ideas that fall flat. When the world says no, it is a statement about circumstances, timing, or fit. But when we internalize that rejection, we transform the world's external no into an internal identity. We stop believing we failed at a task, and we start believing that we fundamentally are the failure. True. Unshakable self-acceptance is not about ignoring reality or pretending that every door opens for us. It is the deep, foundational understanding that your intrinsic worth is entirely decoupled from your external achievements. Think of it like a house. If your self-worth is built on the porch of external validation, on the compliments, the promotions, and the acceptance of others, then a single storm of rejection will tear the whole structure down. But radical self-acceptance is the concrete foundation underneath. The weather outside can be brutal, the porch might get damaged, but the foundation does not move. You remain intact. When we look at the most resilient cultures and individuals throughout history, they share a common trait: they do not seek permission to exist or to value themselves. They understand that external rejection is merely data. It is information about the environment, not a verdict on their humanity. If you look at the mechanics of growth, a no from the world is actually a boundary line that forces you to look inward. It asks a critical question. When everything outside tells you to stop, do you still have a reason to continue? If your answer is rooted in who you are rather than what you want to acquire, your trajectory becomes unstoppable. The shift happens when we stop trying to fix the world's opinion of us and start fixing our opinion of ourselves. Cultivating a radical, unshakable yes means looking at your flaws, your missteps, and your incomplete goals and choosing to stand by yourself anyway. It is an act of supreme loyalty to your own potential. When you grant yourself unconditional acceptance, the world loses its power to break you. It can still delay you, it can still challenge you, and it will definitely still say no to you, but it can no longer make you feel small. You become the source of your own validation, and from that place of security, you can build anything. Keynotes of the speech: the identity trap. External rejection is a commentary on timing, alignment, or circumstances, but internalizing it turns a situational failure into a personal identity. The foundation model self-worth built on external validation is fragile and temporary. Radical self-acceptance is the immovable foundation that remains intact regardless of external conditions. Rejection as data to know from the world is not a verdict on your human value. It is environmental data that serves as a boundary line, forcing you to clarify your intrinsic motivation. Supreme self, loyalty, cultivating an unshakable yes requires choosing to stand by yourself unconditionally, acknowledging flaws and incomplete goals without diminishing your worth. The shift of power: when you become the primary source of your own validation, external rejection loses its capacity to break you, converting obstacles from emotional threats into practical challenges. The human mind is an incredible pattern recognition machine designed to find order in chaos and meaning in events. From an evolutionary perspective, this kept us alive. If a bush rustled and a predator jumped out, our ancestors learned to connect the rustle with danger. But this exact same cognitive mechanism creates a massive psychological trap in the modern world when we face rejection. We experience a negative external event, a rejected proposal, a missed promotion, a failed relationship, or an ignored idea, and our brain immediately looks for the underlying cause. Instead of looking at the complex, messy web of external variables like timing, market conditions, budget constraints, or supervisors' personal biases, our minds take the path of least resistance. We turn inward and conclude that the common denominator in the failure is us. This is the origin of the identity trap, the moment we allow a situational no from the external world to morph into a permanent definition of who we are. When you look at how people navigate their professional and personal lives, you see this trap playing out constantly. There is a profound difference between the sentence, "I failed at this task," and the sentence, "I am a failure." The first sentence is an objective assessment of a specific event in time. It isolates the outcome from the individual, treating the mistake as a data point, an experiment that didn't yield the desired result. The second sentence, however, is an existential verdict. It alters the individual's identity. When you step into the identity trap, you stop viewing rejection as something that happened to you, and you start viewing it as the truth of what you are. The danger here is that identity drives behavior. If you believe you simply made a mistake, your brain looks for ways to correct, adapt, and try again because your core capability isn't being questioned. But if you believe that you are the mistake, your motivation vanishes. After all, why would a failure bother trying again? Why would someone fundamentally flawed expect a different outcome next time? This psychological shift completely paralyzes human potential because it changes our relationship with risk. When rejection is isolated as a situational event, risk is just a calculated cost of doing business. You understand that to get a yes, you have to collect a certain number of no's along the way. But when rejection threatens your identity, the stakes become dangerously high. Every job application is no longer just a request for employment. It becomes a referendum on your worth as a human being. Every creative project is no longer just an expression of an idea. It becomes a test of whether you deserve to belong. To protect ourselves from the agonizing pain of having our identity crushed, we unconsciously choose to stop playing the game entirely. We shrink our ambitions, we play it safe, And we stay well within our comfort zones, not because we lack talent, but because we cannot risk another external no confirming our worst internal fears. Breaking free from the identity trap requires a deliberate, conscious decoupling of outcome from identity. It demands that we look at the world's rejection through an educational lens rather than an emotional one. When an environment says no to you, it is merely revealing its own current limitations, preferences, and boundaries. It is saying that at this exact moment, under these specific parameters, the alignment wasn't there. That is all. It is a description of a dynamic relationship between you and an environment, not a solitary diagnosis of your soul. By maintaining the strict boundary between what you do and who you are, you preserve the psychological capital needed to stay resilient. You allow yourself to remain a work in progress, viewing each external, no, not as a heavy brick weighing down your identity, but as a guidepost directing you toward the path where your unshakable internal yes will finally find its match. To understand the true nature of resilience, we must examine the architectural difference between a structure built on a fragile frame and one built on an immovable bedrock. Most of our lives are spent unconsciously constructing a version of ourselves that relies entirely on a platform of external validation. From our earliest days in school, we are conditioned to look outside of ourselves for proof of our worth. We chase the high marks, the praise from parents, the applause from peers, and eventually the titles, the salaries, and the social status that the professional world offers. This creates a psychological model where our self-worth is essentially built on the metaphorical porch of a house. The porch is highly visible, beautifully decorated, and explicitly designed for the world to see and admire. But because it extends outward into the environment, it is completely exposed to the elements. If the weather is clear and the world is smiling upon us, the porch feels stable. But the moment a storm rolls in, the moment the market crashes, a manager criticizes our work, or a long-term plan collapses, that exposed porch is the very first thing to be ripped away. If your entire identity is housed out there on the porch of what others think, the destruction of that external structure means the destruction of you. Radical self-acceptance is the conscious decision to move your sense of existence off the porch and down into the concrete foundation underneath the house. The foundation is not glamorous. It cannot be seen by people passing by on the street, and it rarely receives compliments or applause. However, its value does not come from visibility. Its value comes from mass density and unyielding presence. When you cultivate an internal foundation of self-acceptance, you are establishing a core belief that your human value is entirely decoupled from your current circumstances. You recognize that your worth was present before the achievement. It remains present during the struggle, and it will still be present long after the goals are either won or lost. This foundational shift changes how you experience the volatility of life. When the inevitable storms of rejection, criticism, or failure hit the house, the porch might get damaged, the windows might rattle, and the exterior paint might chip. It hurts, and it causes real damage that requires time and effort to repair. But the foundational structure beneath does not move an inch. You remain psychologically intact because you know that what was damaged was merely an external circumstance, not your core humanity. Operating from a stable foundation completely alters your relationship with the outside world because it removes the element of desperation. When someone lacks an internal foundation, every single interaction with an employer, a client, a partner, or a peer becomes an existential negotiation. They are constantly asking, do you approve of me? Am I good enough? Will you validate my existence? This puts immense power in the hands of external forces, allowing the whims of an unpredictable world to dictate their emotional stability on a daily basis. But when you stand on a concrete foundation of self-acceptance, you no longer approach the world looking for permission to exist. You enter rooms already holding your own validation. You don't ask the world to tell you who you are. Instead, you offer the world what you have to give, fully prepared for the fact that the world might not always be ready or able to receive it. If an opportunity rejects you, it is simply a mismatched piece of data, not a seismic earthquake that threatens to collapse your internal world. You retain the clarity and the psychological safety needed to evaluate the situation objectively, learn the necessary lessons, and rebuild whatever external structures need adjusting, confident in the knowledge that the ground beneath your feet is completely secure. When we shift our perspective from an emotional reaction and educational observation, our entire relationship with failure undergoes a radical transformation. In our default state, we treat a no from the world as a moral verdict, an emotional strike against our value, or a sign that the universe is actively working against us. But if we strip away the emotional narrative we attach to rejection, we find that a no is actually something remarkably simple and entirely neutral. It is data. It is feedback from a specific system at a specific point in time. When a scientist runs an experiment and the chemical reaction does not occur, they do not plunge into despair or assume they are a deeply flawed human being. They simply record the result as environmental data. They acknowledge that the current variables, the temperature, the timing, or the mixture did not produce the expected outcome. In the exact same way, when you pitch an idea, apply for a role, or launch a project and the world says no, it is merely the environment revealing its current limitations, its current budget, its current preferences, or its strategic direction. By viewing rejection strictly as data, you remove the heavy emotional friction that usually causes people to quit. This data acts as a psychological boundary line, and boundary lines are incredibly useful because they force clarity. When you hit an external wall, it forces you to pause and look directly inward. It demands that you answer a fundamental question about your motivations. When the environment stops rewarding you, stops applauding you, and actively blocks your path, do you still believe in the core reason why you started? If your motivation was entirely superficial, driven only by the desire for quick external validation, easy praise, or immediate rewards, then the external no will successfully halt your progress. The boundary line will stop you because there is nothing powering you from within. However, if your reason for moving forward is deeply rooted in your internal values, your curiosity, and your dedication to self-mastery, then the external rejection cannot stop you. It merely forces you to recalibrate your strategy. This understanding completely alters how you navigate obstacles because it turns a barrier into a guidepost. A boundary line doesn't mean your journey is over. It means the current route is closed. It tells you exactly where the system is rigid and where you need to adapt, innovate, or redirect your energy. When you treat rejection as information, you become highly analytical instead of highly defensive. You start asking structural questions. Was the timing wrong? Did I communicate the value clearly? Is this particular environment capable of recognizing what I am offering? Or do I need to find a completely different market that aligns with my vision? This shifts you from a passive victim of circumstances into an active student of reality. You begin to collect no's the way an investor collects market insights or a developer collects bug reports. Each one makes your understanding of the landscape sharper, your skills more refined, and your approach more sophisticated. Ultimately, the power of treating rejection as data is that it protects your psychological capital. It keeps your creative energy and your ambition from being drained by emotional exhaustion. You no longer waste time nursing a wounded ego or wondering why the world is unfair. Instead, you accept the boundary line as a factual reality of the current moment, integrate the feedback it provides, and immediately begin working on the next iteration. When your internal trajectory is powered by a purpose that exists independently of external approval, a no from the world ceases to be an emotional threat. It becomes a functional asset, a necessary piece of data that helps you map out the path toward where your unshakable internal vision will ultimately break through and find its true alignment. To achieve true internal stability, an individual must eventually confront the reality of their own imperfections and make a definitive choice about where their primary loyalty lies. The greatest battle we face is not against the critics in the world, the gatekeepers in our industries, or the external forces that deny us opportunities. The most exhausting conflict happens entirely within our own minds, where we constantly negotiate our self-worth based on our performance. We live in a culture that subtly teaches us to condition our self-love on our achievements. We tell ourselves that we will fully accept who we are only when we finally reach that specific career milestone, fix that flaw in our personality, lose that weight, or complete that ambitious goal. This creates a deeply toxic internal dynamic where we treat ourselves with conditional love, effectively holding our own peace of mind hostage until we prove our worth to the world. Cultivating an unshakable, yes, requires a complete reversal of this logic through an act of supreme, unconditional self-loyalty. True self-loyalty means making a conscious decision to stand by yourself right now, precisely as you are. In the midst of your incomplete goals, your messy transitions, and your visible flaws, it is the understanding that you do not need to become perfect to be worthy of your own support. Think of it as the ultimate partnership between you and your potential. If an external partner only supported you when you were winning and abandoned or berated you the moment you made a mistake, you would recognize that relationship as deeply dysfunctional and conditional. Yet, this is exactly how many of us treat ourselves. When the world says no to us, we join forces with the world and start attacking ourselves from within, agreeing with the external criticism and amplifying the doubt. Supreme self-loyalty breaks this cycle. It means that when the world rejects you, your internal relationship becomes even tighter, more protective, and more supportive. You look at your missteps, your failures, and your current limitations, and instead of distancing yourself from them in shame, you choose to own them completely while remaining fiercely committed to your own value. This shift changes the very nature of human growth. When you operate from a place of self-rejection, you try to improve out of a sense of shame. You think, I am broken, so I must fix myself to be acceptable. Growth fueled by shame is incredibly heavy, exhausting, and fragile because every single setback feels like a confirmation of your inherent worthlessness. But when you practice supreme self-loyalty, you seek to grow out of a sense of profound stewardship. You look at your potential and think, I am fundamentally worthy, and because I value myself, I want to develop my talents, correct my mistakes, and see how far I can go. You are no longer trying to fix a broken identity. You are simply managing and expanding an asset. This form of growth is sustainable because it allows room for mistakes. When you make a mistake under the banner of self-loyalty, it doesn't diminish your value. It simply means you have a new area to cultivate, an incomplete skill to practice, or an old habit to outgrow. When you grant yourself this unconditional acceptance, you completely rewrite the rules of your life. The world loses its ability to dictate your internal state because you have neutralized its sharpest weapon, the threat of making you feel unworthy. If an employer denies you a promotion or an investor passes on your project, they are rejecting an offer or a specific match. They are not rejecting your humanity because your humanity is already fully protected by your own internal loyalty. This level of self-acceptance is not passive. It does not mean you become lazy or indifferent to self-improvement. On the contrary, it gives you the immense psychological safety required to take massive risks, speak your truth, and push boundaries, because you know that even if you fail spectacularly, you will still be there to catch yourself, dust yourself off, and stand firmly by your own side. The ultimate evolution of radical self-acceptance is a profound shifting of power. In our standard operating mode, we treat our internal world as a vessel that must be filled by the approval of the external environment. We walk into rooms, step onto stages, and enter relationships with an empty cup, silently begging the people around us to fill it up with their validation, their applause, and their permission. This structural dependency places us in a position of extreme vulnerability. It means that whoever holds the power to validate you also holds the absolute power to break you. If your sense of security is a direct reflection of how the world treats you on any given Tuesday, then you are not truly free. You are simply a hostage to fluctuating opinions, shifting market trends, and the personal moods of gatekeepers. The profound transition occurs when you consciously decide to shut off the external pipeline of validation and engineer an internal wellspring instead. When you become the primary source of your own validation, the entire power dynamic between you and the world is permanently reordered. When you enter a space already holding your own validation, your presence changes from one of desperation to one of contribution. You are no longer there to take, you are there to give. You are no longer looking for the environment to tell you that you are smart, capable, or worthy, because you have already settled that debate internally before you even walk through the door. This internal security completely neutralizes the emotional sting of external rejection. When the world says no to someone who is self-validated, it no longer has the capacity to break them emotionally. It cannot crush their spirit. It cannot make them feel inherently small, and it cannot compromise their sense of human dignity. The rejection is instantly stripped of its existential weight and downgraded from an emotional threat into a purely practical challenge. A no ceases to mean you do not belong here, and instead simply means this particular door is currently locked. This shift from an emotional threat to a practical challenge completely frees up your cognitive and creative energy. When a rejection hurts your ego and threatens your identity, you waste days, weeks, or even months trapped in an emotional hangover. You spend your energy nursing your wounds, overanalyzing what you did wrong, feeling bitter toward the people who rejected you, and doubting your overall capabilities. But when your validation is secure, you do not experience that debilitating emotional drag. Because the rejection didn't damage your core identity, you have the psychological clarity to look at the locked door with absolute objectivity. You can analyze the mechanics of the situation clearly. You can look at the feedback, adjust your strategy, refine your skills, or simply realize that this particular environment is a poor fit for your vision and walk away without bitterness. The obstacle is no longer a reflection of your worth. It is simply a puzzle that requires a tactical solution. Furthermore, this relocation of power makes your long-term trajectory completely unstoppable. When you are the author of your own validation, your motivation becomes entirely self-sustaining. External rewards, praise, and milestones become beautiful additions to your life rather than strict necessities for your survival. You can endure long periods of obscurity, silence, and difficulty because your engine is fueled from within. You become capable of building projects, chasing visions, and sticking to disciplines that the world might not understand or appreciate for years. The world can still delay your timeline. It can still impose real-world challenges, and it will undoubtedly continue to present you with obstacles, but it can no longer control your internal state. By anchoring your worth in your own unshakable lasts, you reclaim total ownership of your life, converting the unpredictable storms of external rejection into nothing more than heavy winds that test, but can never break your resolve. Ultimately, the journey toward radical self-acceptance is not a battle to change the mind of the world. It is a campaign to claim absolute sovereignty over your own mind. The world, by its very nature, will always remain an unpredictable system of gates, barriers, and shifting opinions. It will continue to hand out rejections, it will continue to misjudge your timing, and it will definitely continue to say no to your grandest ambitions. But the true measure of your freedom is not whether those external doors remain open, it is whether your internal foundation remains completely immovable when they slam shut. By choosing to decouple your identity from your outcomes, by treating external obstacles as neutral data, and by maintaining a fierce, unconditional loyalty to your own potential, you effectively strip the environment of its power to diminish you. You step out of the exhausting cycle of seeking permission to exist and step into the reality of your own unshakable worth. When you stand firmly in that truth, you realize that the world's no is merely a temporary circumstance, while your internal yes is a permanent destiny. From this day forward, let the world say what it will, because you are finally the author of your own validation, and an authenticated life can never be broken.